7:03. I think we'll get started now. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the fifth champ camp of this term. Joined with us today is going to be Andrew Lin. He won fourth place. I'll actually let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew. Um, First of all, thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate that you guys are willing to learn and are willing to grow in your role play. So I really appreciate having an audience so people would actually be receptive to my advice and stuff like that. A little bit about me. I'm 17. I had my birthday last weekend. Um, I'm a second year DECA member. Last year I competed in principles of business management. It was my first year. I loved it. ICDC was amazing. And this year I did HRM, and yeah, that's a little bit about me.
All right, well, thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you to everyone that came. So for the first question, and this is kind of going to because a lot of people came from districts, so they understand how they did in the first competition. A lot of these people are also first year members. So, first question is going to be kind of in that sort of realm. Can you take us back to right after you finished your district competition last year or this year, and how did you feel about your performance then? And in that, did you have any immediate realization about what you needed to change for states?
Yeah, actually, I just had a talk with my principals members. I'm the director of principals at Limburg DECA, so I oversee all the competitive natures of first year members. And wow, I mean, my first district competition was so amazing. I walked in completely unprepared. Like I did one, maybe two practice tests, maybe one role play, and I completely expected to place in my written. So I had no expectations going into districts for principles of business management. However, I feel like I really vibed with my judge. So I felt like walking out of that competition, I did okay, but I didn't really expect much until I heard my name called on stage. And honestly, it's one of the best feelings in the world when you get a sense of accomplishment for putting in work for your efforts. I know, unfortunately, DECA is pretty competitive and not everyone can perhaps get on stage. But my advice to you is I know a lot of people left districts feeling a little bit disappointed, and it's really, really important to move on from that. Just take it with a grain of salt because the next competition you have at states, you're going to have a completely different judge. You're going to have a second chance to do your role play or role plays, and your test, you can just study for it. You have an entire month. So don't be afraid of how your districts went because you know you can do better and you can improve. Um, Personally, though, I did place pretty well in my first district competition. And I'm not going to lie, if I didn't win there, I probably wouldn't have had the motivation to go further in DECA simply because I would have thought it was impossible. However, I'm telling you right now, it's not impossible. Like everything is on the table here. You just have to keep putting in the work, and just being here is amazing. So, yeah, that's just a little bit.
Okay, great. So a lot of members do well at districts with moderate preparation. And what was the specific difference in your preparation strategy from districts and states? And did you change your study schedule or your practice routine?
Yeah, so for districts, I used a very generic acronym when prepping for my role play, which was the DECA acronym, where I defined, explained, connected, and went above and beyond with each one of my, I guess, role plays. However, I realized it was a bit limiting in the scope and like how well I could actually prep for my role play because keep in mind you only have 10 minutes to do your role play prep. So instead of wasting time writing unnecessary things down that I already knew what I was going to talk about, I just threw that out the window and I just went all in on making more visuals and creating value for my judge. So every time I went into my role play or did a practice role play, I made sure that I had something unique that would make me different from the rest of my competitors, just to make sure that the judge had an actual reason for giving me a better score than the rest of my competitors. And then, so basically, the main thing I changed to answer your question is I changed how I prepped and I also changed how I thought about the role play. I'm not just doing the role play to do the role play. I'm actually trying to try to provide value to the judge and differentiate myself from the rest of my competitors. And that's exactly what you should be aiming for as well.
Thank you.
Hope that answered your question.
So you talked about having the visuals so you can provide actual content for your judge. Can you give a couple of examples of visuals that you actually use in your role plays that the judges liked?
Yeah, so I'm a 100% graph person. I just love using graphs because anytime I have an actionable plan that I want to present, when faced with a problem that I have to solve for the judge, what I like to do is I like to use graphs to support my actionable plan. Keep in mind that when you're doing role plays, obviously it has to be realistic. However, you can make up graphs, you can make up statistics. You can just say, according to a study by Harvard University, XYZ. That builds your credibility, and it also makes you seem like a person who's done their research. And using graphs is a great way to actually use visuals to point out to your judge, hey, after we implement XYZ policies, we can see customer service improving using a high slope in the graph. So I like using graphs. Another visual I really like using is bubble diagrams. I feel like a lot of people, when they do their prep, bullet points, which is okay, but it doesn't look as good to the judge. So when you're trying to show your visuals, you always want to try to captivate your judge by making it different. Just be different. Use a bubble diagram instead. And for example, if you need to explain the nature of customer service, which is a pretty common PI, you would have customer service in the middle bubble and then 5 different traits of positive customer service. For example, taking leadership, being kind, uh, and like 5 other if you can think of it. So just having a like genuinely, visuals is arguably the most important thing in your role play because I've seen a lot of other people and they just don't have visuals, which is okay, but it can be better and you can still improve your role play just by spending more time and investing your prep time in making powerful visuals that you can use for your role play.
Can you share a moment where a judge asked a question that you weren't prepared for or you felt kind of stuck on during a role play, and how did you recover from that and keep the conversation flowing?
Um, in terms of like questions, I don't really know. However, I can tell you that I get really, really flustered sometimes when talking to my judge, simply because like it's okay to be nervous, but I do get nervous a lot. So when I do get flustered, what I like to do is I like to like let myself calm down using this nervousness technique where basically I move all of my nervous energy into my feet. So this way the judge cannot see that you're nervous and you're able to channel all that nervous energy into your feet so that it doesn't show up on your face or how you present yourself because it's all under the table. So whenever I get flustered or I get like, oh, I said something I shouldn't have said, I just like to move it to my feet, if that makes sense. And then I guess if I do have a question that I don't really like, I'm thrown away by like, oh, I didn't expect this, I would just take 5 seconds to really allow you to collect your thoughts because your judge frankly does not care if you take 5 seconds to respond because they know that obviously it's spontaneous and you won't have the answer immediately. So don't be afraid, just calm yourself down, take 5 seconds and try to formulate a creative uh, answer to the question.
So with states coming up in about a month, what did your specific timeline look like? So were you very consistent in your practice? Were you more short time here, break here, short time here? And how did you kind of balance those practice exams and role plays during per week?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna lie, I haven't done much prep. Uh, But I'm not saying you shouldn't do prep. It's because my prep was a little bit different from how traditional prep looks like. It's because I got to do a lot of role plays with my first year members. So I got to analyze their own role plays and see where they could have improved so that I could use it in my own role play. So even though I was technically helping them, they were also helping me by telling me where I could improve, what their strengths are that I could use as well in my role play. Um, but in terms of prep, I did a couple role plays before districts, and I also took a couple of tests. And then what I plan to do for states is obviously I'm going to lock in. I can't tell my principals members to do role plays when I don't even do it myself. So I plan to do maybe a role play every single week, and then the week of states or the week before states, I plan to do a lot more role plays. And I really will not sleep on the test, because the test can keep you away from the podium, even if your role play is absolutely amazing. That's happened to me um, at states last year. So I'm not gonna sleep on the test, because it's when everything is so competitive at states and ICDC, you need every point you can get.
So kind of going into that DECA exam part, so DECA events are super heavy on core business concepts. So how much weight did you put into studying for the exam versus practicing for the role play?
Yeah, I did a healthy combination of both. So Shrestha, who's from my school, actually made a huge PI list, over 100 pages on every single performance indicator, and I just read it like the Bible. I just made sure that I memorized everything, like anything and everything about every single PI I didn't know. For example, economic activities, like what is that? So I just went to that PI specifically and tried to understand what it was, so that if I ever faced it in my role play, I knew how to handle it. So yeah, for every performance indicator that I didn't know, I made sure I really studied it to understand how I would address it if it ever came up on my role play. And in terms of preparing for my role play, that's what I did for the majority of the time, because I feel like I already had a general understanding of business. However, I think what was lacking last year, at least, was my communication skills, because I was a terrible communicator. I was honestly really not comfortable speaking in front of groups of people or an individual person, which wouldn't serve me well in my role play. So I really, really worked on doing as many role plays as possible, so I could get an understanding of how each role play is kind of formulated and how I could answer it effectively, but also to practice my communication skills and make sure that I could articulate whatever I was saying just by doing as much practice as possible. And one thing I will add to that is that while visuals are very important, the way you present yourself is 90% of your role play, because you have 10 seconds when you see your judge to give them a lasting impression and make them want to listen to you for the rest of your 10 minutes. So you need to have a very good first impression, and you have to carry that confidence, that ability to articulate yourself through your entire role play. Because if you I looked at over like 20 rubrics from my principal's members, and I noticed that those with high overall impressions in their 21st century skills had very high PI marks as well. So I think that the what's it called? The rubric is extremely misleading. I think overall impression is like 90 of your points out of 100, simply because it's so important. If you can't articulate your PIs well, you won't get a high score on your PIs. So you really, really need to practice articulating what you're going to say, because your presentation is everything.
Okay, so to the next question, did you have any specific method for memorizing your PIs? So I know a lot of people, like you mentioned how you studied it like the Bible, that 100-page PI
Of
list.
course.
Did you have like an acronym for each one? Did you have some sort of visual for each one? How specifically did you study your PIs?
Yeah, so for every single PI, I like to think of either an acronym or a real world business case that I could utilize in my role play. When people say you can't really study for the role play, I say that's completely false, because when you actually put in the work beforehand, then you can just, with the snap of your fingers, understand your PI and what you're going to say. So you can study for the role play, believe it or not. And how I would do this is, like, for example, I love this acronym for customer relations, like anything in customer relations. I like to use the SERVE acronym. I just chat GPT'd it. It's sincerity, empathy, responsiveness, value, and excellence. And these are the 5 things you should bring for every customer interaction. So just chat GPTing stuff is a great way to help you memorize what you're going to say for any PI, but also it provides your judge a way to remember what you're saying in a meaningful way. And also, I really, really recommend, if you don't have a lot of time, just do a deep dive into a singular company that you want to know well and you think has a lot of opportunity that you can utilize in every single one of your role plays. Like for me personally, I read a 300-page book on Apple and its processes, And that helped me because for every single one of my role plays, I was able to use Apple, whether it be information management and how their supply chain is extremely efficient, or how they deal with the government in China. And just using this big multi-billion dollar national company, I was able to utilize it for like almost every single one of my role plays. So really try to understand the business industry around you so that you can use it in your role play and actually show that you know how to utilize real world business knowledge in your hypothetical situation.
So I know that you've given us a lot of strategies in what kind of content you can mention, how we can prepare for role plays, but can you share a technique that you use to stay organized and manage the time constraints of your role plays?
Yeah, so I think the main thing with that is in order to understand how to utilize your 10 minutes, you just have to do as many role plays as possible. Because I remember when I first did my first role play, it was 5 minutes long. And I have 10 minutes. So imagine all the stuff that I'm not saying to my judge. So doing as many role plays as possible, I could get an understanding of the flow of your role play and how you're supposed to allocate your time. And finally, I've come up with a kind of general structure for how long you should spend on each part of your role play. You have your introduction, your PIs, and your questions. So for your introduction, you should have a 30-second strong introduction that is already pre-planned out before you even enter the competition room. Obviously, the details are going to be a little bit different, but you should have a strong handshake, for example. You should just practice your introduction because again, your introduction is the most important part of your role play, arguably. So that's the first 30 seconds to a minute. And then for each of your role plays, you should spend 1 to 1.5 minutes. Well, yeah, 1.5 minutes around just talking about your PIs. So that would be 6 minutes in total. And you really want to deep dive into all of your PIs, showcasing what you know about business, but also how you're going to help this company grow. Obviously in the role play, but and then for your final 2 to 3 minutes, you should spend it on questions because questions are really important because they show how you're able to think on the spot. And judges love that because that's cool. So you want to be able to think on the spot and leave 2 to 3 minutes for your questions. Yeah. Because I remember when I was doing my ICDC role play, oh my God, I got so triggered because I had 10 minutes, but I went overtime. So my judge was in the middle of asking the question. And then this man just cut me off, bro. And I think that really led to my demise in a way. So that's why I'm telling you guys so you don't have to repeat the same mistakes. Leave time for questions because questions are a great way to show that you can think on the spot and obviously leave a good lasting impression. Not being cut off by a judge because that's a terrible last impression. Don't do that.
Okay, so we got a question in chat from Betty. She asked, "What does the day of the role play look like for you?"
Betty, thanks for hopping on. I appreciate that. So for me personally, during the role play day, I can use districts as an example. What I did is I like to preoccupy myself, not think about the role play because if I do, I get a little bit nervous because like there's so many variables, and I just get nervous when thinking about all the different outcomes. So I don't like to think about the role play. What I like to do is the night before I get a very good night's sleep so that my brain is awake and able to articulate whatever I need to say. And then during the day of the role play, I just distracted myself. So like me personally, I was running for state office in Silicon Valley and I just spent the entire day just talking to people, getting to know them because that's honestly really enjoyable. So I just had the role play in the back of my mind, but I didn't stress about it because stress builds over time, and that's never good when you have something of this kind of importance. I hope that answers your question. I know that's not the typical advice, but I just say like forget about it.
So Kathleen is asking, when studying for your PIs, do you write down your explanations for each one, or do you just memorize the information? I know that you were mentioning Shrestha's 100-page PI bank, so.
Yeah. So uh like wait, do you mean like wait, Kathleen, right? Do you mean like writing explain on your prep during your prep time or like beforehand? I can answer both. So every single time I look at a PI, I try to think of how I can utilize it in a role play. For example, using real world business examples or graphs or visuals or whatever, you name it. But during the actual role play, I've done my prep outside of time, and honestly, using trying to explain every single PI, writing it down is frankly a waste of time because you only have 10 minutes. You should instead be thinking about how you can use your visuals to explain. You should actually just draw out your visuals and let your speaking carry the rest of it, because you don't have a lot of time during your prep time to actually um, to write stuff that your judge isn't going to see. You want to dedicate most of your time to thinking about how you're going to say your role play or making visuals for your role play, so you can show your full 100% effort, all of your visuals to your judge instead of writing stuff down. Unless like me personally, I can do that, but I realize some people are a little bit afraid to go in blind in a way without notes. So just find your style by doing as many role plays as you want as you can, and try to find your own flow. Yeah, because everyone does it different. I'm sure Robert, Jalen, and Chloe and Trishta all have different strategies, but this is what I personally do. Take it with a grain of salt, but if it does resonate with you, then try implementing it.
I love that. So you had a lot of info and insight on the role play, but specifically for studying for the test. I know
Oh
Candace
yeah.
asked about that. How do you study for the test? Is it just going through PIs, going through reps, a ton of practice tests? What do you do?
Yeah, Candice, that's a great question. And I like to think of it like building a muscle. You're not going to build a muscle if you do one rep. You have to do 10 reps over many, many weeks in preparation for your I'm blanking out your competition, because if you don't do it over a course of a long time, then you're not going to build the muscle memory, not the muscle memory, the memory of all the different vocab that you need to know. Because a lot of times when I see the exam, there's like 10 questions with vocab terms that are very, very business related and niche that I just have no idea what it even is. And the key to answering those questions is that vocab term. So when I'm studying for my exam, obviously I put in a lot of reps, but I also like to see, like, really learn, really dissect that test to understand what I did wrong and how I can improve from it so that I don't make the same mistake again. A lot of people just grind out practice tests, but unfortunately, they don't really understand why the answer is the answer that it is. And I agree. It can be completely frustrating sometimes because DECA has some weird answers for some questions. I'm sure you can all relate. So you really need to understand how DECA wants you to think, and also memorizing those business terms so that when you come across it again, you will get it right and everyone else will maybe not. And then you'll get one extra point.
And just to quickly add on to that, because I just saw that, she also asked, and how do you utilize the master key, so the answer key? Like, do you look on the links, or how do you usually look through that?
Yeah, so I like to use the Google search bar. Every time I don't know something, I just like to search it up. For example, matrix organizational structure. I know, like, that's been on a lot of principles tests, and it's a very niche business term that a lot of people don't know about. So I just like to search up every single one of those terms that I don't know and really try to memorize it. Obviously, there's so many different ways to memorize it. You can use flashcards, Quizlets. What I personally like to do is put everything in a Google Doc and try to, just before test day, look at every single business term that I didn't know that I learned, and just making sure that I reviewed it in a big study sheet so that I would remember it.
So I'll take one last question from the chat, and she's asking, how did you focus on all the instructional areas and thoroughly memorize or prepare for all PIs? So were you doing role plays in like all the instructional areas? Were you studying and memorizing every single page of those PIs? What was your strategy for that?
Yeah, so my strategy honestly could have been a little bit more refined. I feel like I just did as many role plays as I possibly could. Like, I know leading up to states I did a role play every single day, but To be honest, that's a bit OD. You could honestly have more efficient ways of doing that simply by looking at the frequency of your PIs. You don't have to study every PI because more likely than not, half of the PIs are just stuff that they might put on ICDC round 2. Everything else is just fair game. Like, for example, explain the nature of PIs are most definitely going to be things that you have to study. But if it's like demonstrate leadership or something like that, a very short PI is probably not going to be on the test. So I talked to Shrestha a lot about this, and she taught me what PIs to look over and what PIs to actually study versus the ones you can kind of disregard. And that way you can save like hours and hours of time learning PIs that you would never actually see in your role play. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that. Now, before we leave today, once again, these were amazing insights. I'm sure everyone in this call has learned so much from all of this. And so we wanted to end it off with a little call photo, and Josephine, our coach, will be taking that photo.
Advice, not advice, but mentality wise, I want you guys to take districts with a grain of salt. Remember that you're going to have a completely different judge as states. And as long as you put in the work and you really, really practice your role play and you don't sleep on the test, don't sleep on the test. But if you really, really combine everything together, like I believe in you, you got this. Don't even worry about the numbers. Sure, there's a lot of competitors, but you can pull through as long as you just believe in yourself and you continue practicing every single day. And also, like, if you guys have any other questions, like, please reach out to me. I don't know if I'm allowed to share my Instagram, but just reach out to my DECA Instagram account. I can put in the chat because I know you guys might have some other questions, which I would love to answer.
You can shout it out
Wait,
loud. Where can people find you?
wait, I don't remember my tag. Wait,
Oh,
let me search it
no.
up really quick. Deca.andrewlin. So yeah, if you have any other questions for me, like I honestly want to help you guys. I want to see you guys at ICDC. I want to see you guys get the recognition you deserve. So just keep putting in the work. Keep your head down. Yeah. Just keep your head down. Keep doing the work, and let the results make the sound.
Thank you so much. All of you guys are free to leave.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.